keynote is Lessons Learnt Building and Maintaining National Treasury's Open Budget Data Viz portal. Our speaker is JD Bothma, who is the head of product at OpenUp, which is an open data and civic tech nonprofit. He is a software developer by training who supports work across the organization to ensure there is a balance of focus on what clients, partners, and end users want and, possibly more importantly, need, and progress towards their organizational vision. That vision is a South Africa where citizens and government are empowered to thrive collaboratively. JD's worked with massive legacy monoliths, many micro-experiments. He now finds it thrilling to build simple, robust systems that reliably do their job and don't do harm when they fail. You could do worse than that as a motto for what you want your software to do. He's learned a hard lesson or two about what it takes to make a data system maintainable and sustainable, but argues he has a great deal more to learn before this would be considered solved. And I imagine you're going to be covering quite a few of those things now. I think, as I say, that's enough waffle from me, because you'll effectively hear from me again, because you just can't escape me. And that will be over to JD for our closing keynote. Thank you, JD.
Hello.
And you're listening to the backup track. I hope you like my talk.
Okay, that was a disaster. I'm losing my voice, and I've realized, you know how you realize that people are using your service when you switch the service off and they shout at you? The same thing with my voice. It turns out I like talking. But let's just cross fingers, and let's hope my voice stays in. Is it my voice cutting out or the sound? Like this. Cool. Is this better? How about now? Awesome. Okay. Yeah. So you heard the intro. Getting confused between which side my screen is. But I've got a bunch of lessons to learn. I hope that for you it'll be. I'm really going to be talking about, at the end of the day. Well, a big part of it is what happens when users are not just using what you're producing, but also like creating that data and entering that data. And for me, this will be therapy. I think for you, it'll be triggering, but fun for me. So thank you very much. So I work for OpenUp. We're a nonprofit. We're working towards a South Africa where citizens and government are enabled to thrive collaboratively. We use things like technology, software, data, user-centered design, systems thinking, not systems engineering necessarily, to get that done. And the main centerpiece, a lot of this comes from a range of projects, but we'll mostly be looking at examples from building Vulekamali, which is at vulekamali.gov.za. And that's the National Treasury's budget portal for sharing the national and provincial budget data throughout the year. And the homepage, as you might imagine, has it shouts out, features the latest publication. Further down the page, there's a little bit of a data viz. People like shiny, like pretty colors and things, and it also provides a bit of an accessible introduction. And if someone doesn't click into these, you can click into it and then go to pages, except right now, because those other pages aren't working, and that is a big part of the topic of the talk. What happens when the data isn't there or uploaded properly, and then your beautiful creation breaks? But if they don't go any further than this, at least they take some takeaway, like learning and culture, this big square that the resolution isn't really capturing very well now, is a massive part of the national and provincial budget together. So this talk might help you if you're building data-driven tools, if humans are curating your data, if you're contracting with government or working in government. And I really enjoyed Gordon's talks. We've chatted a lot of the times in the past. I really want there to be a community of, for software companies, you all, to be working with government and providing that quality software engineering, data engineering capability that they sorely need to kind of enter the modern era of operations. And so that I can build something open source and there is someone who's going to maintain it, or other people who are bidding on these tenders. The way we got this project is by bidding on a tender that was advertised, and we've since won the renewal. So what we use to kind of frame a lot of what we built here is what we call personas, or what are called personas. And this isn't the full set, but really personas are kind of a representation of the real people that you are building this for. And they have to be validated against real people, but do that over time. But it really just helps that you don't, anytime you're designing or releasing a new feature, you don't have to speak to those real users, as long as every now and then you do actually speak to real users and make sure that your understanding of them is still correct. But just an interesting thing here that I think isn't so common, we needed to reduce the number because everyone wants a site built for everyone, and you can't build something for everyone. To get something done, you need to narrow focus. So we put the original set of personas on a scale from like lowest public finance knowledge to highest public finance knowledge from someone's insight, and it ended up with sort of this scale where we had a group of people who are probably already doing budget data analysis, a bunch of people who maybe could potentially do budget data analysis, like as an example, a CSO, a civil society organization leader, might be familiar with government data budgets because that is a big part of their petitioning for change. But they might not be great at data analysis. A data scientist might not be familiar with this domain, but once they get familiar with the domain, they're ready to go. And then there's a bunch of other people that we really wanted to be building the site for, but there's a good chance that they're not going to get there. A website isn't going to get them there, but some of these might act as intermediaries for them. So I'm giving you a very quick tour of the site because it's going to inform a lot of why such a range of things are there, and then the thing which ultimately causes us some pain, which is really just fun problems for us to solve. A big part of the site is department pages. So government departments aren't necessarily the most natural concept to introduce people to the budget, but that's how government is organized. So if you're trying to change things and make things better, you're ultimately going to have to engage in terms of departments. So a lot of the data is structured that way. So that's where we are. And this page is also helpful to kind of begin to introduce concepts like the fact that there's an education department in national government, but also in each provincial government. Same with health. But certain things like police is only national. And it's rudimentary, but it's there. Then an actual department page is broken up into sections with kind of automated charts. So every year there's a new department page because departments generally exist year in, year out, but sometimes they change, sometimes their focus changes and so on. So we want to be able to kind of, for 40 national departments, 120 provincial departments, every year generate a chart that summarizes its programs, a chart that summarizes its budget according to kind of line items kind of thing, and so on. And next to each chart, there's an explanation of why this view of the budget is useful, a link to a PDF that has more narrative, and an Excel file that accompanies the PDF and stuff like that. So yeah, lots of roots. Another quite an important part of the site is not everything is super structured and regular and planned. Or regular, really, everything is planned to death. But there's also just the general idea of having a overview page for data sets, and that data set is really being overloaded to mean some PDFs with tables inside on a website over there, and sometimes it's just like an actual data set that we have an API to. When it is a link to some content over there, it's actually quite nice to have this kind of introduction to that data, because that other government site doesn't really tell people who don't know what this is about and why this is important. Like deviations from the procurement process procurement process being how government is allowed and supposed to buy and sell goods, buy goods and services. And deviations from that is when they don't follow those and it gets logged. This is an important data set. But from the analytics, we see people use these screenshots, people use these pages, and then they click through and go there. So that's a pretty big win for us. And then there's guide pages. So each data category, including the procurement data sets, but also budget data sets, adjustment budget data sets, lots of categories of data on the site, has a guide, and that's just like rich text and images. And this image, while it might not be beautiful, I'm not a designer, but I'm sure our designer can do better. This is actually one of the best illustrations of how our taxes get divvied up amongst how government is structured, which is why just using it directly is really great before we've got time to kind of make it data driven and clicky and cool. My point with that is that image comes from a book that gets published once a year, which kind of accompanies the budget and explains a lot of the thinking in the national budget. There are some really smart people actually working in government. They're still publishing the budget as a book this thick for reasons, but there are frustrations working with government, but there are also just really great people, and bringing modern approaches to developing stuff to them, I think is really satisfying as well. So very, very briefly on information architecture, because this is a Python conference. In addition to kind of laying out your site and deciding what content goes where and how things are organized and stuff like that, and having little squiggly lines to denote maybe how someone would move from one part of the site to another. What I really want to get at is journeys, words we use, super important, thinking about the personas and so on. For me, a big thing here is also finding a balance and a compromise between the user's model of the world and the data that's available, and your capacity to kind of change the structure of that data to maybe map how you want to present things to the user, and then what's in the real world, and if someone is going to have to interact in the real world with this data or insights they gather from the data. There's a compromise there, and I think that's the main stuff I wanted to raise here. So this is all interest stuff. We're nearly getting to the war stories and the scars. So there are all kinds of things on this data portal. Just in summary, basically, there's department metadata. So something needs to make sure, there are Django models that means that there's a department page every year for every department, sometimes with different names, and you can kind of follow them across when the names change and things like that. There's a PDF or actually a couple of PDFs and Excel files for every department every year that needs to be linked in context. Then there's actual data sets that are available in APIs, and links to data on other data sets. And then you can go and upload your analysis and share that as a contributor data set as well. So I think looking at the architecture, the easiest way to look at that is in terms of how data is kind of where data lives and how it flows. So everything here is Python really. The budget portal part is a Django app. CKAN is an off-the-shelf open source data portal building tool that really helps you classify data sets. It's more about metadata and uploading blobs somewhere than it is about getting an API to your data, and that's a common misconception, although there is a plugin to do that. And then OpenSpending is a tool for publishing fiscal data and getting an API to that. So yeah, we'll go into a lot of the detail. So just in summary then, what we're going to be looking at the end of the talk, we'll look at OpenSpending, that it was hosted by another vendor initially, and that the open source thing really works. On the budget portal, I'll touch on adding a CMS to an existing rather big Django project. And then the meat of the talk is data upload interfaces and flexible data management and the joys of that. So the first thing, initially the architecture was that this was actually a static site, and the Django app would generate these little YAML files for every page, containing all the data that's needed to generate the page, all the charts, everything, to be able to generate that page. And I think we're in the region of like 400 or 500 pages, because we do four years at a time. So there's a script that just anytime there's a change to some of the data, either in the budget portal or CKAN, like fetches all of those things and then regenerates those page context YAML files. And then a Jekyll static site, Jekyll, which is a static site builder, would generate the pages. This is kind of, yeah, you don't need to see the detail, but you get a nice YAML file, which is checked into Git, because we were using GitHub Pages for hosting the, which then also generates the site. And a nice little feature is that you get diffs on changes. So you make a little change to something, and you see precisely every single change to every single page, which is handy. And part of the reasoning of doing it this way is that we built another site, municipalmoney.gov.za, and pre-calculating all the indicator values was really helpful and necessary, because once those little dotted lines on the charts is averages, because to put numbers into context, it really helps to understand where you are relative to the average, but not talking in terms of standard deviations and things like that. This is for us, for normal people. And you don't want to be, if you're comparing to 5 or 10 or 15 municipalities in the province, or maybe all similar municipalities nationally, you don't want to be generating that indicator for all of them live for 6 different charts on a page. So pre-calculating is a useful thing. The other reason is, I don't think I can share exactly what the scale is of this, but there's enough so that you can see there's a nice weekly pattern in people using this in their jobs normally, but then once a year when it's budget day, there's the budget speeches in Parliament, and now and then the minister mentions this portal, and then you get quite a spike. And there's a couple of events, other events in the year where this kind of thing might happen, as well as news and things like that. So yeah, being reliable and performant is a big deal to us. What isn't so great about rebuilding, fetching data for 400 or 500 pages every time anything changes is that like fetching all the data ended up taking about 20 minutes, and then building a Jekyll site like this ended up being about 20 minutes. And it's all nice to have like lots of pages linking to each other and have suggested other data sets on a department, so data sets that are relevant to that department. But if someone changes the description to that page, then every department page must also be regenerated. So there is work that could probably be done with kind of incremental static site regeneration and all of that stuff, and limiting what gets regenerated. But at that point, I decided, Jekyll templates are very close to Django templates, and the views are already structured as Django views per page. So it was really just easier to move it to Django, and to set up some basic caching. And I forgot your name. Yes, there's probably a lot of people who want to have a word with me about saying this, but caching is a science. I think today caching is a science, or it's more of a science than it was 5 or 10 years ago. Have words with me afterwards if you disagree. But don't be afraid. Like, there's a lot of people who still refuse to go into caching, or do very caching is great. It's wonderful. And you can do basic stuff like just say, this page must be cached for 5 minutes, and then it'll regenerate on the next request. But you can also do very, very, very granular specific things. And Django provides a framework for all of that stuff. It's really great. It's a science. You have to approach it systematically to debug it. Yeah, I know it's tricky, but it's a science. So then that's just the first scar and introduction. Other challenges, and this is kind of where we're going to be going into the data management stuff. Keeping the data up to date, and who does that, and so on. Dealing with gaps in the data and the effect of that on the portal. Inconsistencies in the data, especially when humans are managing that. when data isn't formatted correctly, and who deals with that, when do they deal with that, and how, and then how to give helpful feedback to admins. Technology was, relatively speaking, the easy part here. Working with people who are not used to an agile process, the client is a committee, you don't have one product owner. We proxy to the committee. That stuff is harder than the tech, and soaked up a lot of the time. But it's still a fun project. It was when it was before, and it is now. So I talked about budget day on February. While we tried not to implement this calendar in the system to keep the system flexible, because you don't know when this process is going to change, we did document things in terms of that schedule, and then that links to kind of pages that go into more detail of how to do each operation. And the idea was now happening, that someone inside Treasury is doing the data updates. So a lot of quite clear documentation, because they're not programmers, they're not data scientists. There are some people who work with data, but yeah, good documentation was super important. So as an example then of what happens and then what goes wrong, uploading a new national budget means setting up 40 national departments, their name and their description can change each year. So we just always just do a new one. And then upload each department's narrative PDF and the accompanying Excel file. And that Excel file is literally just the tables that are in the PDF, but they're an Excel file. It's small wins. At least you don't have to take the table from the Excel file. But the tables are very much for human consumption, multi-levels of headings, thousands over there, so you know what the unit is and stuff like that. So you don't just pull that into something and do analysis on it. It's yeah, so there's a separate data set that we then have the tidy data, which is one measure, like one number column, lots of classifying columns, which you can then pull into stuff and do analysis on. So that gets uploaded as an Excel file, as a CSV, and it gets exposed as an API endpoint. And then there's a number of other supporting PDFs and Excel files and smaller files that are used differently as also available as APIs. So I mentioned departments are Django models. Actually, there's financial years, governments, so every province. We don't expect the province would change. It's just, if you're modeling the system this way, you can take shortcuts, but it's also simpler to just make the models, and it doesn't take a lot of time to create 9 provinces each year. It's fine. And then you've got your governments that you can start relating department objects to. Now, it's going to be bad if people are manually entering the details for 40 departments, especially because those department names need to match the department names in the more structured data to be queried programmatically. So we use Django import-export to do that. It's a little bit easier for someone to prepare a spreadsheet with all the metadata for departments. And if you haven't used Django import-export, it is lovely. It is fantastic. It can do really great stuff in admin, showing you can do custom validation functions, and that can then show up as like an error in the cell and be quite explicit about what's wrong. If new things will be created, new objects, so each row pretty much correlates to an object. If new objects will be created, then those show up as green. If it's going to replace one value in an existing object with another, it shows a diff. It shows a minus and like a crossed out and the new value. It's really good feedback, and it's very effective. And people can kind of preview what's going to happen and then click save. And then as long as everything goes right, then that's what happened. It just doesn't work very well if there's like every row, every cell ends up with, especially related cells, ends up with database queries. So this doesn't scale to thousands of rows. It scales to whatever can be checked and validated in one kind of submit a form and get a response back. So uploading and associating those department PDFs and Excel files then. So I think I mentioned CKAN. So CKAN comes out of the box with great functionality for filtering data sets, classifying data sets by the file types and types of resources that are in there. The open source license in that, people are using that for data portals all over the world. It's an open source Python thing. They've been moving from pylons to Flask. I don't know where they are now, but I think better than when we were building this. And it's a really great tool for organizing data sets. And you can also add custom fields that you can classify and then data sets with. So we added the sphere of government, the province when there's provincial data, the financial year, and you get facet counts and all of that. You get full text search with a plugin. So it's really great. And that way we could basically do an API query to CKAN and get the PDF for this department in this financial year. And that problem was then solved. But to upload those, again, you don't want to do that manually. So yeah, I just talked through basically whenever the budget portal would be presenting a page, and like for the Department of Health in 2015, it would then ask CKAN for the Department of Health's budget document, PDF document in 2015, as well as the big structured data set and all of that stuff. And then it can render the page. So, and I mentioned that PDF that is linked there. It's not maybe the best design, it's very wordy, but there's an actual explanation in that PDF, and no one is going to, this is part of the process. This book goes to Parliament. This is what people are kind of using as the foundation of their budget debates in Parliament. We're not going to be changing that process anytime soon. There is machinery in Treasury to prepare this book year in, year out. So yeah, we're not going to change this, and there's no one who's ready and able to take this information back and put it into some form or something like that, so that we can present it in a nice mobile responsive web page or something like that. We're stuck with a PDF, but at least linking to the PDF gives people access to maybe the best explanation of the plans of how your money is going to be spent in the year. So that's what we did. So we built our own little upload interface, very much informed by Django import export, and it does a lot of the same things. So there's a spreadsheet that contains far right column, it's a bit cut off, but links to those documents, metadata, which department is which, and which financial year, and all of that stuff. And then when you run it, you get a preview. So blue is when it's going to be doing something. It's going to create a data set. It's going to upload a file, something like that. Green is when everything has been created and uploaded and it's good. Nothing's going to happen. Red is when there's some kind of problem. So if here is like the communications department has a very explicit typo. In reality, like the issues you're going to have with the data is more insidious. Someone is going to use a long hyphen here, but a short hyphen in another place, or they're going to not hyphenate consistently or not capitalize consistently or add an extra space, and all of that stuff is going to be pain. So being able to give very, very precise feedback is really, really helpful. And being able to then run this, and maybe some network errors happen during some of the uploads, and then they come and try again and see, oh, these things haven't been uploaded yet, but it's going to upload if I submit again, so it'll just work when I do it again. So yeah, and then those uploads need to happen asynchronously. So we use Django ORM queue with the, Django queue with the ORM broker. The nice thing about that is you can also see queued tasks, and we can tell people this is how long the queue is. So don't submit now. It's busy working on some stuff still. But Django queue is great because I think you can configure it even without the ORM queue to show you failed tasks, and you can go see those errors. Those errors might be stack traces, but it's better than those errors not being visible and not being available for quick troubleshooting. So some of those learnings then from these upload interfaces is that letting administrators preview pending changes is really helpful, and handling partial success is really crucial, because something is going to go wrong partway through processing stuff. But especially if these things are slow, you don't want to like cancel the whole thing, or certain things you can't do atomically. You can't like upload some files to CKAN but not save the stuff here. So you have to support retrying. You have to support the user doing corrections and give them the feedback so that they can do those corrections and try again. It's also important that this is idempotent, like those retries, because if someone is submitting something and submitting again, you don't want bad stuff to happen, basically. And they might submit again, and those things will happen concurrently, and it still needs to be idempotent. And I don't know if you noticed that there are 2 Excel files in this screenshot, but that. Remember, I said people need to wait until all the tasks are processed, so we're not idempotent in that sense yet. The other one pain point for me is that this kind of validation based on other columns, I'm not really sure of a nice way to code that without big nested ifs. And maybe it's just that I didn't spend enough time on it, and I'm just thankful for Python Black for formatting it in a vaguely readable way. But yeah, I'm not sure how to code it, but this functionality you definitely need, and maybe you can show us how to code it in a more readable way later. Maybe some of the mechanics of Django import export can be used even if the admin integration isn't right. Okay, then people have imported a bunch of stuff, but there are errors when data is missing or data is misclassified or it's broken. So the last data import thing to show you then is uploading those big granular data sets that you can actually pull via the API and show charts with. And we use this thing called OpenSpending, and that's an open source Python at the core tool. And as usual, you upload a file. What's a bit unusual is you classify the columns using a schema that they provide that is fiscal data or government spending data specific, which has some nice properties which we can chat about if there's time later. But once everything is uploaded, either you get a cryptic error message back saying that there's a key error because 2 of the rows, that's detail, which we can also talk about, but properties that are necessary about the data that someone who isn't a data engineer needs to enforce, or it all worked fine and you can now get a URL, which is an endpoint to the API to that. So to tell CKAN about that OpenSpending, the data set in OpenSpending, so that the budget portal can fetch it, you add it as if it's a data set or a resource in a data set, and you just give it the URL instead of uploading a file, and then you classify the format as OpenSpending API. And then the data portal queries for OpenSpending API type resources that match a certain financial year and so on, and boom, you get data for the right chart automatically for the right financial year. So then, if you go to the site right now, national departments for the latest financial year will work, provincial departments won't. As a developer, I look at the Sentry report and I know exactly what's going on here. It's trying to get a resource on a data set, but the data set is none. That either means that the data set wasn't uploaded, or it was uploaded or created. It was created, but it wasn't classified correctly because someone is requesting a provincial department for 2022-23, and it can't find the data set for that. So to explain why this kind of thing happens, maybe, and I can just fix it, I know, but this talk was more important. So a bit of context, we code for the happy path, like we employ Agile even if our clients don't necessarily. And with data visualization and data tools, you don't know what's actually going to be useful. So you don't want to invest everything and go all out like luxury suite validation and admin user interface and everything when you might throw this thing away, because once you put it into production, you realize no one understands this. We need to totally rethink this. There's also so many errors that can happen that you can't imagine. So there's no point in trying to cover every error. So we've tried to focus on the areas that actually occur and deal with them. Yeah, we might scrap the feature. We also built this originally as a static site. And all the data was fetched at once. So we were doing these uploads. We immediately see if one of the departments don't build and fix that instead of it kind of being broken for months and months and months, and no one notices. Yeah, so it was maintained by us. We can read the stack traces, and then and missing data was kind of considered a bug a lot of the time. And the handover then that was supposed to trigger us improving the admin interface didn't happen and didn't happen and didn't happen because of organizational reasons that are beyond our control. And no one outside of us were doing those uploads. We weren't going, oh, we should now do those uploads as if they're doing those uploads and fix the bugs so that they can do it. So they kept prioritizing other features because no one was championing making the admin interface really usable. Yeah, I was gonna play the annoying TikTok lady again, but basically just generally speaking, so this kind of coding for the happy path and let it crash thing comes from the Erlang world, where you really want to discover errors and fix them because bad data is really bad. And on this site in particular, but a lot of government sites and a lot of data sites, I think an error message or this is not available is better than showing the wrong value. So I think generally in data projects, like let things crash, let things break, rather discover the issue than do the PHP way and just carry on processing as if everything is fine and show the data and you've missed some kind of calculation because something failed. And yeah, so let errors show themselves. If you catch exceptions, log them, please. Log them. If you catch exceptions, log them. If you program defensively and you're checking for errors and then moving on, log them. Okay, so getting data for a chart, very briefly then, get the data set from CKAN, get the resource with the type that you need, generate a query URL for whatever chart you want to draw, fetch the data, actually do the HTTP request to OpenSpending, transform the data, calculate whatever you need to calculate. Then we also want to, so the site is for people who aren't necessarily going to do analysis with the data and just look at the pretty pictures, but some people also want to then take that chart and go and play with it and drill into the details. So we expose we let people download a CSV. If the chart is rolled up to the point where you've got just 5 blocks in a tree map or something like that, we also give you that slice of the much bigger data set at the lowest level granularity, so you can drill into whatever dimensions you want to drill into. So generate that URL and then return, like build that as a data structure and return it so that the whole section can be presented. Okay, so there's supposed to be, I'm colorblind, so for me that looks pretty much the same. There's supposed to be a lot of green, some yellow, which I think you guys can see better than I can. But so admins need to answer questions like, why isn't this showing? Why am I getting an error message? And that the answer is somewhere in all of the data stuff that go into that page. And so there's a kind of this trade-off between helping admins fix it and just helping the admins enter the data correctly to avoid bad stuff from happening. And it's quite tempting to build a dashboard. This is an Excel version that's been quite helpful already. And they just kind of log what they've started uploading, what they've finished uploading, what is overdue, red is overdue, stuff like that. And it deals with like, what have we started uploading and stuff like that. And if you automate this, then you can also include information like, well, I can find this part, but I can't find this other thing that I also need. So then they can go and fix that. And yeah, I really want to get to that. I think yeah, there were other things. As I was preparing all of these little speaker things for you, when I thought my voice wasn't going to make it, I wrote down some actually clever things to say. But I can't read quickly, so never mind. So the other thing that you can do is just wrap a lot of things in big exceptions. And that's tempting, but you need to log your exceptions. And also, like sometimes you want to distinguish for the end user between whether something is not here yet or whether something is whether there's something wrong. Because if something is wrong, maybe they can check back tomorrow or next week. If something isn't here yet, it might only be here in 6 months' time. So there are often important decisions to be made. And also, if you're always just catching and logging exceptions, how do you feed that information back to the administrators to know what they still need to go and fix? So I think building a dashboard like this is actually worthwhile. But we're about to kind of see a bit of qualification to that. So because there's so many things that can go wrong in each data set. So you end up building like 5 checks, and how do you ensure those many checks remain consistent with what's actually being shown on that page, or what could actually go wrong with that data set? Yeah, what could actually go wrong? So many things. External services can be down. People can enter that URL incorrectly. The other metadata might be entered incorrectly. CSV is not UTF-8. Excel hates you. Microsoft hates you. Don't come and talk to me about Microsoft embracing the open source world and blah, blah, blah. There are enterprise licenses to Excel that can install an Excel version on your machine that has all the UI to create a UTF-8 encoded CSV. And don't ask me how people manage to give department names in South Africa non-ASCII range names. That's a different story. But you've got all the UI to save a CSV as UTF-8, and then it just doesn't. And the best workaround, without installing additional software on computers that people don't have permission to install software on, is open it in Notepad and then save as. Okay, Microsoft sucks. People can capitalize things incorrectly, and because they don't have identifiers, consistent identifiers for departments over time, and for various reasons, department names as identifiers aren't actually that stupid, except for the capitalization. And normalizing with slugifying stuff is a nice idea, but ask Excel people to slugify something and you're going to have a bad time. So yeah, and then years go by, and years are bad things for government projects because they don't buy sprints. They go through long procurement processes that, ask Gordon, go wrong many times and have to be restarted. And 6 months later, your site's been down for 3 months, and you haven't just got unless you've got a really good contract to kind of come back and fix stuff, which for some reason just doesn't happen. So yeah, time is tricky. Then conditions have changed. So different people are now the people who are supposed to administer things. Required data sets that used to be there every single time on budget day, 21 February or whatever, are now like months delayed. But because it was always immediately available, it goes alongside this data set, and these two mean these charts work. Without one of them, the charts crash. So yeah, that's a pain. Columns that have always contained text might suddenly contain integers. So someone nicely put in a value.strip and suddenly that crashes. Commas might be used as a decimal separator suddenly when it never has before. And not our code, someone else's code decides to strip that comma, and suddenly millions are now billions. And on a budget visualization site, that's very bad. So broadly speaking, admins need to be able to upload data without fear. They need to be able to upload stuff and not risk the minister being embarrassed. And a bit of an aside, in South Africa, there are departments that are under constant attack because they're trying to keep the train on the tracks. And there are people trying to take the wheels off the train, and embarrassing ministers with transparency projects going bad is a bad thing. So stuff is important. Anyway, that's the end of the aside. admins should be able to understand the issues, independently go and fix those issues, try and try again, and rapidly get feedback. Because if they need like context switch and don't come back, then it's when are they going to have time for this again? So yeah, you want to give them a tight feedback loop and retry loop, and they need to know the scope. So some of the learnings then kind of condensed. Generalized tools like CKAN, OpenSpending, Django admin, and Django Q, and import export are great, and they've really enabled rapid iteration, which is fantastic. Maybe one of the biggest caveats of that, apart from that, learning a framework takes time. It does, but also someone else learning your custom code also takes time, except the documentation is worse. So, but the main thing with generalized tools is that you might end up with many disparate interfaces that all work differently, and if someone is using that interface once every month or 3 months or something like that, then that's going to be a risk for the project. So finding that time to kind of consolidate those, maybe put a pretty face on, or like a consistent face on some of those interfaces is important. Okay, another learning, the awkward middle ground data. So if you're working with lots of data, like millions and billions of rows of data, your expectations are generally appropriate for that volume of data. You're not going to clean it by hand. You're not going to open it up in Excel. If you do, you're going to learn not to. You may be ingested via an API or via a big process that's maybe includes some strict validation or something like that. I'm making assumptions. I don't work with big data. I work with medium data. So if you work with little data, that's maybe like a handful, the sort of data that someone enters via form, and then can maybe preview and go, oh yeah, I need to fix that, I made a mistake there. Or you can have a bot ask questions and only provide valid options, like a Telegram bot. Collecting that volume of data is lovely, and it can scale, but like maybe one person is entering only a few rows of data or something like that. The medium amount of data, the sort of data that people manage using Excel, and maybe the skill of the people, the data wrangling skill of the people who manage data in Excel, because they probably have very, very important other skills and knowledge that I couldn't dream of. But getting them to meet the expectations of their managers, who are like, I want dashboards, I want charts, I want reports, I want beautiful things. And they've seen some of those people manually do analysis and visualize that data. 47 minutes. Okay, I'm going to eat into question time. I hope you don't have questions. No, we're kind of drawing to an end. So that volume of data, like when they're manually doing that, they're impressing their colleagues and they're doing really cool stuff. Now they want to automate that, but they don't know what goes into getting the data, being disciplined with your data and getting the data to the shape where you can just upload it and everything works. And you need to give humans the feedback so that they can get the data into that shape. So what I think is the way forward, and it really, like, this talk has given me the opportunity to condense some thinking I've been doing for the last year or so of just hearing people over and over complaining about people with the most beautiful Excel templates with validation and all of that stuff, and still failing to get the data into the right shape. I think the way forward is upload wizards, so only allowing valid options for classifying the data, maybe implicitly selecting some kind of workflow that restrict what the user can do, what the user can enter, so that it's only really valid for that workflow, and takes care of whether the user is adding data or replacing data and that stuff, which is something no one thinks about. It's quite a pain. You really need to think about that. The other thing with upload wizards, I think, is remember that dashboard. So what did I want to say? There are so many things that you might need to check by by reducing the things that can go wrong, by simplifying and restricting the upload interface, you've got less checks to do in that dashboard. So because now if the user can only select valid stuff, anytime something is invalid, that's a bug now. So leaving that to blow up in an exception is the right thing to do. Then background tasks, of course, maybe some stuff needs to happen asynchronously. Importantly, if the user then, if it is more than an instant, the user needs a notification to come back. They need to be able to see the status of that thing at any time, and they need to be prompted to come back and finish the rest of the process if they need to maybe review a validation report or something like that. And then those validation reports should be saved somewhere so they can kind of come back and check and so on. They need to give them really, really good feedback, like really good feedback. And humans are creative. No amount of documentation will result in clean data. We've documented like which fields, this is the capitalization. You can copy and paste these column headings, and these are the valid values and all of that stuff, and they will get it wrong. And it's not that they're idiots, it's that this is not their stuff. This is our stuff. These are our concerns. They don't think about this. This isn't the most important thing to them. Well, for us, this is the most important thing. So one tool that I think can really help with that is frictionless data. They haven't paid me. We've used a previous iteration of this called Good Tables as a GitHub action to validate some data sets before uploading, actually. And while that as a workflow was horrendous, it did validate the idea that kind of it does help to kind of try and get a data set more close to correct. And they've got some React that can also be saved as a JSON validation report, which their React components can then present beautifully and show you this column heading has this issue and this cell has this issue. We just need to do something about regular expressions, maybe provide some human readable like this, what that regular expression is looking for. Okay, so final straight. One of the other ways, validation, all of that stuff is great, documentation, to communicate what the inside of the data set needs to look like and really what you're able to do with it. We found pivot tables quite effective. If you don't know pivot tables, it's basically a way of taking that tidy data kind of table with each column classifying some property of each row and then having one or more value columns and saying, I want to summarize it so that this classifying column, like maybe the amount type is one you have here, and should be, I want a column for each of those, and I want a row for each department. But this is a data set of 40,000 rows. So it condenses that by every cell, every row that matches that column and that row, everything just gets summed up together. And boom, you've got this simple summary. And you want to drill down, you just add another thing to the rows or something like that, and it draws into more detail. If you want to focus on one department and summarize just that, you add a filter. So it's a very convenient, learn it, put it on your CV. If you're the data scientists know it. So it's a very powerful tool, and that speaking to Excel people, that was a very effective way of communicating. They didn't know, some of them didn't know pivot tables either, but it was something that they could then use to talk about, like, if you do this and this and this with this file, it should look roughly like this. But next year, the numbers will probably just generally be slightly bigger, kind of thing. Okay, very briefly, adding a CMS to an existing project, Wagtail was awesome. You can choose which routes that it needs to kind of take over or fit it into the routes. We could reuse the existing design system. So pages that were just static templates, we could then take those templates, and Wagtail has this notion of a stream of reusable blocks. Stream of reusable blocks. Yes. So basically, each block is effectively a component on your page. So if you have something like a section with some text on the side and an embed, and the embed must have like this white card kind of thing, then each of those could be a block or a number of blocks, but this whole thing's also a block with those things as attributes. And each one has its own template, and your CSS speaks to it, and that's your existing design system. I'm not a coder, but I could copy enough in, and then suddenly the traditional CMS, you just give a WYSIWYG editor and people insert images, and it's a horror show, and it's not responsive, and so on. And this can actually be responsive and all of that stuff. And like I said, I'm not a front-end dev. So, so yeah, that's really, really powerful. And creating an area where people can just create arbitrary pages nested under arbitrary pages was really nice when we suddenly had to add COVID budget visualization. And so we could do all the data viz on some other platform because it's a once-off, and just embed those charts. And that platform is Data Wrapper. Also didn't pay me for it. They're also really, really, really great. So yeah, open source being awesome. It's really real. So the vendor hosting OpenSpending decided to stop hosting OpenSpending, and we could spin up OpenSpending dedicated. And I know that's a stupid name. OpenSpending.vulekamali was taken by the proxy. But yeah, so we could replace it and we could demonstrate. And I'm saying this to you because if you're working with government, talk about open source as avoiding vendor lock-in and like not being tied to the whims of suppliers, and be that other company that can come and stand in for this vendor and host this Postgres and Python thing. Because open source is often spoken of as this dirty thing that is worse than standard vendors. So yeah, that's a big deal. So in short, use open source off-the-shelf tools, ship something, anything, but think about the admins, come back and make their lives easier, give them excellent feedback, and try and ensure that your contract allows for that, or that you leave space in that, or motivate for that. That's it.
Thank you, JD. There's a lot of deep thought, deep stuff in there. A lot of lessons I think we could all take away. Does anyone have any questions for JD at the end of that? Sorry, I saw a hand at the back, but there we go.
Right. Yeah, JD, that was awesome. Thanks so much. You know, and I said it on social media, but I think it's really cool that we started the conference with someone from government and we're ending with someone from civic tech. You know, if the message is we need to get more open source into the public sector, I think it's certainly an encouraging sign, right? I have so many questions I could ask you, but I'm gonna just like try and keep it to two. I think, you know, I would really be interested to hear what you think about, firstly, it seems like a lot of your pain relating to the admin and getting data into the systems is down to the fact that it's humans in the loop and it's human created data, but it's that awkward like teenage medium data set size. Did you guys think about or investigate the possibility of data being extracted from, I don't know, some sort of transactional system that's capturing this budgeting information anyways? And then the second question, and you know, feel free to defer this if it potentially it could go wrong. You mentioned, you know, your customer didn't use Agile and wasn't familiar with Agile development. What was their reaction to it, and over time, how did they find working in an Agile fashion? You know, what was your experience of them learning about Agile through you guys? Yeah, thanks.
Cool. Yeah, so I think anyone who isn't opening their data is nervous about opening their data. So what was made available to us really was what was already public. And that was some form. So they have a system that aggregates all of this data. Aggregates spending data. the budget data, they're building a warehouse, a data warehouse for that, but it wasn't ready to use really. And contract dates have strict dates, so need to ship something. So we started using just using what was already public, which was their kind of Excel macro-based aggregations of budgets. Yeah. And then on the Agile question, so the way we approached it was to the client, the product owner being a committee, which is the first rule of product owners is that they're not a committee, to proxy that. So I kind of acted as business analyst kind of thing and tried to understand the data, shape it into something, work with the designer, come up with some mock-ups that really speak to the data, because we've plugged real data into it and we're confident the data really can do this, because if you don't, then you end up selling something that it turns out, turns out the data can't do this. Now we have to go back and apologize. So we kind of did that. Then we would come to those committee meetings and present mock-ups and so on. So I think they gave us a lot of scope for that, which was great. And I don't know how to make Agile happen in government, but I think just kind of supporting them, holding their hand very much in that process, and not forcing Agile down their throat, but ensuring that Agile is happening to the best degree that you can, and finding the places where you can iterate. Some other things are fixed, like we had to put certain data sets on there if it was available, which is why we couldn't scrap those data sets and come back and do this. So yeah.
Perfect. Thanks, JD. Good questions. Thanks, Gordon. Anyone else? Anything further? As you say, you did eat a bit into your question time, but we've got a bit of scope for questions. If anyone has anything further. Yes. As far away as you can get.
So I'm quite fascinated by how far you've got in terms of building the sort of like a hierarchical breakdown of top budget down into next level budgets, because I have a little pet project in the back of my head that, you'll take a coin and put it in the top and it'll bounce down and you'll see, oh, my money went there. And if it goes to somewhere, then you could go and actually open that PDF. So as a taxpayer, you might have a fun submit your tax return and see where your money went, as like, where did my money go? Because it's just too much information otherwise. But
Yeah.
My main question is, how many levels of hierarchy are actually modeled now? And even one would be enough, but I'm just interested in how that's there and where it breaks down into weird PDFs, and maybe how it would make space for volunteers there.
So they have 7 levels of economic classification. I think they have 2 levels of government function. Government function is the stuff that are relatable to us, that are like health, education, and stuff like that. But departments don't match precisely, so there's kind of like a bit of overlap kind of thing there, which is why we've got some cool approach to handle that, because functions are split across spheres, and actually you're supposed to have local there. But and then there's a bunch of other dimensions as well. There's another data set that I didn't talk about, which is, so this was largely focused on budget data, but there's also spending data, and that gets classified according to what's called the standard chart of accounts. And any organization has a standard chart of accounts. And government's one is available as a PDF, of course, and a spreadsheet, and the spreadsheet has really fine-grained descriptions. So I really wanted to build a little thing that just lets you write whatever you want to find, and it'll go zoop. That is the part of the standard chart of accounts you want to look at, and then there's a data set. So if you look for in-year monitoring data, that is very granular. So granular that they can't imagine anyone finding use in it, and then people found it useful, and people inside government started asking, asking them, where is it? Because they found it via Willeke Mali. So that data set is the place to look. That plus the standard chart of accounts, and I'm hoping we get to publish something on that. Otherwise, please submit on.
Perfect. Thank you. I think we need to call it there. That is out of time, and enough of that. We've run out of time for the keynote, but I think, JD, that was absolutely fascinating insight. So thank you very much.